Welcome back to the Getting Shit Done podcast with myself, Will Pringle, and my co-host, Harry Tarbuck. Today we have a special guest on, Larry. If you could sort of take it away and just let us know a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get going.
Sure. I'm an event designer. I work in 4 different regions globally. So I've got offices and studios in the south of France, in Italy, in London, and also in New York. I travel between all of those, then producing and creating and designing mostly weddings, but other celebrations, lifestyle, milestone events, and corporate work. Incredible.
And you started out in musical theatre, is that right?
Yeah, I did.
How did you go from there to where you are now? What's the journey there?
It wasn't exactly a planned path. I actually originally trained as a dancer. I went into the West End. I was in musical theatre and I had an accident and I damaged my back to a point that I can't dance anymore. And I needed to come up with plan B. And plan B took a little while to work out what that was. Lots of people at the time were sitting there kind of saying, come on, what are you doing with your life? And you're like, I'm working on it. Like, I knew what I wanted to do. And now I've got to reevaluate and refine that. And when everyone told me that one day it would come to me, I was like, this is brilliant. It's taking a while. So I was like, I'm not sure when this like ray of light is coming down, but if it could hurry up because I'm getting a lot of pressure. And so I dabbled between a number of other jobs, trying to kind of find out what else would suit, a little bit like Goldilocks, kind of like dipping around. And in the end, I was working for a catering company in London, producing events. I didn't even know there was an events industry. Like I didn't know that this was a thing. And artistically, I've always had a kind of creative streak. Therefore, I kind of lent myself quite quickly into the design side of that, looking at that and going, actually, you could do this with this. You could take this a little bit further. And I was watching what other people were doing and I was just becoming frustrated with the design process, what I perceived to be the customer experience. And I was often working alongside clients to realize what it was that they were looking for. And I found that process frustrating. Therefore, I started to look at it going, well, actually, if you think you could do it better, why don't you just go and give it a go? So I literally took vacation from where I was working, did a 2-week flower course, handed my notice in when I returned and went sat at my dining room table and was like, this is what I do now. So that was 11 years ago.
So it did come to you. How was it? Almost not waiting for it to come to you, but in that period of time where people were putting pressure on you and you weren't quite sure what you were going to do. How was that?
It's really tricky. Like somebody saying, it will come to you, you will know. And you're like, will it? Okay. So you're like, what do you do in that moment? Do you try a bit of everything? Do you sit in one thing? Like, how do you make yourself open to that? And it was true. Like, ironically, it kind of did come to me. I was sat there one evening working on a project for somebody that had like a 3-day turnaround time. So it was incredibly short notice. And I was doodling what I wanted this thing to look like, sending it over to somebody. And in that moment of doing so, I suddenly realized that that client was about to pay 4 times my annual salary on something that they were going to do for a little dinner. And it just suddenly went, hold up a second. If I've just drawn it, designed it, figured it all out, if only I could just work out how to put those pieces together, then I could have been paid that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's when the kind of light bulb moment for me hit and just kind of went, actually, why don't you go and do this? Why are you sitting here thinking about putting A and B together? Just go do it.
And I think that's the story behind a lot of people when they sort of build a business is they wonder what's special about the person that's running the company that does that or the business that does that. Why can't you do that? And a lot of the time, the only reason that person's doing it and you're not is because they've decided to do it, right?
They've made an active, conscious decision to go do that and they've taken that risk and taken the chance.
Which is huge, yeah.
What did those early days look like when you started out? Were they always kind of bigger clients with kind of big visions, or have you kind of built that up to the point you're at now?
I've always worked in the luxury space. So I liken it to when people say, when did you get good at what you do? And I was like, I was always good at what I do. From day one, I've been very good at what I do. I just couldn't get people to necessarily trust me enough to spend enough money with me in order to deliver it. So equally, I always found from the very, very beginning, I found joy in maybe one design that I could include into a celebration, something I really wanted to make. or something I really wanted to express myself with. But let's say on one wedding, it might be that I have like one hero moment. Now I have quite a lot of hero moments. And that's really the only difference. The quality level of what's produced is exactly the same as it was on day one. I just have a lot more trust. And my reputation means that then actually a client will trust me with a larger project to then be more creative in turn. I get a lot more of those moments. But still today, even if I do a smaller project for somebody, it might be that I go back to that. I've got one beautiful piece that I've always wanted to make, but nobody's let me do it yet. And that's the thing that I get to go and do that day. So actually, regardless of scale or size, for me, it's then about those moments of joy that make it interesting for me as a creative.
Amazing. Like from my business, we do a lot of weddings and we film and photograph weddings all the time. And we've been lucky enough to go international and we do a lot here as well. But that's exactly the same as us, where the amount of effort that we put in hasn't changed since the first wedding we ever did.
Yeah.
But it's sort of scaling up and sort of getting to a point where we're charging more and we're able to deliver weddings with 5-6 people filming and photographing. It's completely different. But exactly like you said, there's no difference in the amount of effort you put in. The quality's getting better, but pretty much it's all stayed the same for the last decade.
With experience becomes enables a sense of like efficiency. I'm now able to produce an event at a particular scale within 48 hours, for example. If you called me and said, okay, actually on Friday, can you do it? Yeah, of course I can. Because my process is so refined at this point, I can mobilize incredibly quickly. That might have taken me a little bit longer a few years ago, but actually exactly that, the quality level. And say for you might have started where it's 1 or 2 of you on a project. The output's still just as good as it was, but now the scale of the project you're being invited on just happens to have more. You need more people to capture it. And then in one respect, it might be visually more exciting because there might be a lot more going on. But then also sometimes you might then be asked to go and do a project yourself that's very intimate, that's just a couple maybe having an elopement. And then suddenly that in itself becomes incredibly special. But you pull something different out of that experience, don't you?
Yeah, no, it is completely different. And as soon as these bigger weddings, and we've done weddings that are up to sort of 300, 350 guests, and it's completely different from those smaller weddings. But at the same time, some of those smaller weddings that are really intimate, a lot of the time they are spending a huge amount of money on them.
Of course.
But it's a super personalized and really nice atmosphere to be in.
Absolutely. And that's very much the space I operate. So really, like, everything started with floristry 11 years ago. I'd say it's really been like the last 4 or 5 that I've really moved into what I would consider event design as a category. I actually thought it was really original when I was doing it, because in the UK, there kind of wasn't anybody else in that space. Turns out there was an entire vendor network in America already doing this, have been doing so for decades. So I wasn't as original as I thought I was. But in that space, I had a creative opinion on what everything looked like. And actually the level of personalization to me is incredibly important. It's important that everything that you're putting into a space is intentional. And therefore I ask questions at each level. Why have we chosen that? Why is it that glass? Why is it something else? And then as you kind of go through that, to me, that creates the best output, because then regardless of whether something is large, lavish, impressive, understated, elegant, whichever it is, it's in good taste. Everything's considered, everything makes sense. So now for you, for example, capturing that, you've got something which should actually make your job really easy to do. And that's always kind of my intention.
And the luxury market, it's often driven by referrals, and you know someone. It's not someone generally looking at your website and clicking through and buying. So how did you break into it when you didn't have a track record in that luxury market, but you knew that you wanted to keep and start and keep your business at that level?
So I was a little bit lucky, as in I had a bit of a head start because I'd worked in the industry for several years in a different category for a catering company, but I was aware of producers, planners, people that would be operating at my level, or at least at the level that I wanted to work at. So at least I knew that they existed.
Sure.
I knew who their names, like I knew their names. Some of them I had existing relationships with. And actually, though, what was really interesting is people I thought, because I had wonderful working relationships with them in that previous role, weren't necessarily as enthralled as I was, that I was going and doing my own thing. They're like, great, I'm really pleased for you. Call us in 5 years, like when you're actually good. And I was like, oh, okay. Whereas there were other people that I didn't necessarily have a working relationship with in my previous, that actually were very, very open and kind of like, oh, welcome. Thank you so much. Would love to learn more about what you're doing. And I also realized that there's an entire world out there that was way, way bigger than I even thought it was. And in that, I just cultivated relationships moment by moment. And on every single project, and I still do today, I try and do the very best job that I possibly can because word spreads.
And do you remember your first project?
Yeah, my first ever wedding was for Jodie Kidd, the model.
And how was that? How did that go?
It was a disaster.
Really?
I did absolutely everything wrong. I remember I got so excited. I was like, okay, I'm going to need props. I'm going to need accessories. I was like, I'm going to go to Holland. I'm going to buy all of these lovely things and I'm going to leave everything in its packaging. So everything's boxed up, tissued, stickered, all the things. I didn't actually think about the stickers. And I was like, I'm just going to leave everything as it is. I had it all out in my front garden, ready to be collected by somebody who then I booked 2 boys with a van to come and help me. Only one turned up. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I'd sat there all night the night before wiring individual pieces of ivy together to make long, long, long strands, which by the way is not how you do it. It worked perfectly fine, but took 74 times longer than it needed to. And I arrived on site, started unpackaging all of these things and suddenly realized how many hours it takes to like de-sticker every single accessory that you've bought. And I was like, what are you doing? So the wedding actually looked very beautiful. It went into a magazine straight off the bat. And that was essentially kind of like my first foothold into wedding design. But the number of things I would look at now and look back to go, what were you doing? But I took what I created in that project and I reinvested into the business. I reinvested into more stock and accessories. And the way that I started with everything is I would propose something a client was looking for. And then as and when they signed it off, then I would go purchase it. So I didn't suddenly have warehouses upon warehouses of things, hoping that somebody would want it.
Yeah, sure.
I just waited and then I built everything very, very organically.
It's a great opportunity to be able to, you fail, but without letting down your client. You know what to do next time, so it's more efficient for you, but the client's happy with the end result.
Oh, totally. And that's always the thing. I think a lot of people don't realize in our industry, you have a finite deadline. Always and always. It doesn't matter which vendor you are, you absolutely have. It has to happen by this point. So a lot of people now, for example, like in interior design or retail design and manufacturers and furniture makers, they're always questioning when I'm calling. And they're like, why do you need this by Saturday? Like, this will take 12 weeks to make. And I'm like, no. We've got one. And they're like, I don't understand. Did you just forget and leave it to the last minute? I'm like, no. Our industry works very, very differently. But I think in that, it's really interesting that your experience level, going back to the original point, it's not necessarily that, say, the product or the output isn't as good. It's that your efficiency actually makes you so much better at what you do.
And I imagine the venues that you're running these events in, well, they're turning over events, aren't they? So you don't have weeks of prep because someone's going to be in the most likely the week before. So you've got a very short turnover to get there and deliver and set up.
Yeah, and I'd say venues in that respect is a different beast entirely. I made a decision when I started my business to be particularly adept at working in a space that had a limited time frame. I had already done that working in catering, so I was familiar with those venues, but my mindset was very much into that space. And I see now there's 2 different styles of florist or designers. Ones that will create beautiful work in situ from scratch, but they require a large amount of time to go into a space. Or somebody who's particularly adept at working under a tight time constraint, maybe pre-preparing and installing very, very quickly. there's no better or worse. It's just different, and it just works to different people's design styles. But I am very good at getting into a space or working in a challenging environment. My team infrastructure and the way that we work is particularly adept at logistics. Therefore, actually working in some of those really challenging locations, especially in places like Italy or France, where events aren't necessarily supposed to happen in some of those spaces, makes it a lot more possible for us.
And do you find between different countries and locations that you have different time frames and different struggles?
Absolutely. And a lot of that is culturally. Like, there's a big cultural difference between all of those regions in the way that people like to work or the way you need to be communicating with somebody in order to get a successful outcome.
Sure. And you also operate in the US.
I do.
How different is that from Europe?
Very. So down to the fundamentals of things like health and safety, between those 4 different regions, you have 4 entirely different answers. And it's wild to suddenly realize that you need to have X regulated here, but you don't over here. You've got unions in this one, but you don't in this one. You've got somebody like going up a ladder that needs to have 16 people watching them. In another one, you don't have anything. It's just go for gold. And you're kind of like, oh my goodness. Okay. And actually understanding those is fundamentally one of the most important things I really had to overcome in order to be successful in those spaces. It's not necessarily at that point just about the creativity. It's about the product delivery.
Yeah, for sure.
And kind of touching, you touched on how sort of your team's developed. How's that been? I imagine that's been hugely important for growing it, obviously, in those 4 different places. What's kind of the most important thing that your team has brought to sort of growing your team? Why has that been so important for the business?
I think in order to be able to fundamentally grow any brand, you have to be in a position where the team has to be part and parcel of that. There comes a point which I feel I reached probably around about 5-6 years ago, where I really needed to start handing over to that team and realizing that whilst my name's on the door, there's a finite amount that I can achieve independently. And actually, what I really needed to learn was to pick the right people, put them in the right seats, and then empower them with the ability to make decisions so that we can actually grow. And I think that was probably in the last 11 years, that's been my biggest struggle. That's been the thing that commercially I found the most challenging, because it's hard to hand over that level of trust.
Yeah, of course it will be. And I'm going through that at the moment, where I'm trying to sort of build a management team, and it's very difficult to work out which bits you should keep a hold on, which bits you should not let go, but let someone, take the reins and do it how they want to do it. And it's, when you've got pride in your business, there's a lot more to it than, they can do that for me. It's not just giving away the work. It's actually, as you said, your name's on the door. So there's a lot of responsibility there. With that in mind, how do you encourage creative freedom when you've got huge sort of A-list celebrities and royalty, et cetera, as your clients, and still feel confident that you're going to deliver on a project without letting someone down?
I still have a lot of personal involvement in every project.
Okay.
And so I attend almost every event that we do globally.
That must be knackering.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time living in an airport lounge or on a plane. In that, the name is on the door, and a lot of people will expect to see me and want me as part of that process. Not everybody does, and when they don't, that's wonderful. I get a day off. But I'm very happy in that space. I then work with my team underneath that to look after the day-to-day, to look after the back and forth of that, to enable and empower me to be able to be in that position, to give everybody the time and the inclusion that they want. But equally within that, I've tried to learn to educate and cultivate a space where my expectations are understood, my creative expectations are understood. And as I kind of like to look at it, it's like coloring with numbers. I've got some broad lines that you need to stay within, but they're not so constricting you're suffocated. They're fairly open. Largely comes down to, is it beautiful? Sure. And if it's not, it's a no. But within there, I encourage people to then color the way that they wish to. Also, because trends change, clients are different, And what everybody wants to get, or their perceived version of beautiful, is super individual. My own personal style isn't necessarily right for every single client. Therefore, actually, for me to matchmake within my team a designer or a creative that understands the look and feel that they're going for, especially if that's not me, I've learned to step back a little bit, allow that to happen, and just make sure that within those lines, we're still operating.
And how do you balance that across 4 different offices?
My phone is always on.
So what's the headcount of your business?
12 globally. We're tiny.
Okay, fine. So it's like little satellites in each of these locations. What would happen, say, for example, if on one weekend there was 4 events in 4 countries? Or do you just make sure that doesn't happen?
Generally doesn't happen. I'd say sometimes we do 2 or 3. It depends on the scale. And it really does depend on scale as to therefore what resource is required. If that's the case, then I will have had involvement in somebody's project in a particular part, and then it will be the right thing for it to be handed over to, say, one of the other project managers to actually deliver. But we very much balance the client requirement as well as the scale, as well as the level of complexity in that. And we make a call globally on what we do. So as much as they all operate independently, we actually operate as one
unit,
co-pollinating
sure.
team.
That makes sense.
Was there kind of like a highlight sort of event that you've done, something that's really stood out that has been completely different from anything else that you've done?
In what regard?
I mean, any specific client that you might have that has just requested something completely different from anything else, and has that been a specific challenge?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every project's a challenge in its own right. And I think actually going back to every single client is different. Every taste level is different. And this year I've got a huge amount of diversity over design styles of what people are looking for. Some are really pushing me creatively into a space that I feel quite uncomfortable. But I'm learning to sit in that space in order to actually grow as a creative. And I'm learning to trust within the team that's there that they've got this. And then we come to a harmonious place where I respect the fact that it's beautiful. I just maybe couldn't have got there on my own. And actually, I think that's what then helps the brand evolve. It also helps within the different marketplaces that we're in, because each one, as much as we can all be speaking the same language, or we could all be dealing with clients that are speaking English in a different setting, in a different space, everyone wants something different. But I think in terms of like an event that stood out for me, a few years ago, I did a very, very last minute project where I was given 6 weeks to produce a wedding that a previous designer had 3 years working on. And I was asked to very much kind of come in and what I perceive like rescue the situation, which happens quite a lot actually for a lot of our clients. And I like working in that way because you get to be quite efficient about what gets selected and what gets created. But it was a real challenge at that point. At that moment, it was the largest project we'd ever produced. And I had 53 people building for 3 weeks to create this overall look. And it was incredibly beautiful, but it was really pivotal in that moment, not just because it was the biggest, but it was actually, I think for me, where I realized it was one of the most seamless I'd ever produced. I was so concerned about not delivering or biting off more than I could chew that I was very organized going into that process, as was the team. But it was really in that moment that I realized that my team were empowered to operate independently, because suddenly I was looking around me and things are being done and I haven't even got there yet. I'm working on one thing over here and somebody else is pre-preparing for the next day, as it should be. But it was very much in that remit that I think I had that kind of like light bulb moment that my team were actually incredible.
Yeah. How do you go from that kind of ideation of working with a client, sort of, you know, first meeting them and discussing kind of what their vision is? How do you go from that to actually producing something and then delivering it? Have you got set sort of processes?
Yeah, we do actually have a fairly streamlined design process. We start with a blank piece of paper, and as kitschy as it sounds, like I do sit there with a blank piece of paper and I'm just like, let's just chat. I might even not take notes at all. I generally prefer not to interrupt a conversation by writing things down. I thankfully have a really good memory. But we'll literally just sit and have a conversation. And I just want to, in that moment, understand what it is that you're looking for. Why did you select the space that you selected? Why are you working with the producer that you're working with? What have you seen that you like the look of? And I prefer to not make it feel like an interrogation. We can just have a coffee. We can go through all of your ideas. And I embrace people that go onto Pinterest. Please go and pull me things that you like. Pull me things that you don't like. Anything that you can use to articulate yourself to me visually is going to be helpful. And then from there, what I do is I take everything that I've heard and I go away and I dissect that. And in the same way that I believe a lot of my job is matchmaking, in this instance, a lot of my job is refinement. Somebody might have brought 30, 40 ideas to the party and you're like, this is a wonderful combination of things and it's 16 different weddings. So let's start pulling the things that are most relevant or I perceive are the most important and then start tying in those bits in each little facet to bring as many of those layers in as possible in a way that makes sense.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite that you've ever done that you look back and think, I wish I could do that again?
I think, well, that wedding that I was just describing, in one respect, was my favorite. It was in that moment I really felt like I'd evolved as a designer and that my team were now so capable. From there, it's been the kind of pivot where I've started working on bigger and bigger and bigger projects ever since. And actually, I mean, I always have from inception, but that really was a bit of a turning point. It wasn't necessarily that it was just about that moment. I think a lot of it is actually to do with mindset. And I think as a business owner, I realized in that moment what I was able to achieve. And I realized what was possible. Therefore, I was no longer inhibiting myself in maybe the same way that I had been. And I think at that stage, that's really when everything kind of changed.
And the creativity aspect of your role is obviously the main reason why you do this. Do you think you can teach creativity?
I think you can refine it. I think you can harness it. I think you can encourage it. I think it has to be innate in its essence either way. And I think also the wonderful thing about creativity is it's totally subjective. Therefore, what you perceive as beautiful, and what I do are totally different things. And I find that really exciting.
So it's about channeling ideas into an end product.
Yeah, I don't believe within my team that I teach anybody, for example, to be creative. Everyone's creative in a particular regard. It's now about harnessing that and bringing it to the forefront. And I think I would like to consider I refine that within my team by encouraging them to push themselves further, to maybe go to a place that's uncomfortable and say, okay, well, operate in this space. Create something you don't think you want to do. And find a way to love it. And then actually you come out the other side of it going, oh, that was stunning. And you're kind of like, all right, but you never would have gone there.
That's it. So it's like pushing someone out their comfort zone and take a bit of a risk.
Yeah, totally.
So how do you go about hiring people? Because that's not a tick box interview style, I'd imagine.
It's not. And I hire in one of two ways. So a lot of the time I have to have had some sort of relationship with the person in some part of my life. So there's been a lot of people that over, say, like the 11 years that I've been building the brand, I might have come into contact with. And at some point I might revisit that and actually say, hey, you were working for somebody else at the time. Your energy was amazing to me. Would you ever consider coming on board for something? And, and in that moment, I've never actually hired somebody that I've just interviewed, sat down and met. I also, though, historically, I interview and compare our personalities.
Yeah.
And I usually also hire by zodiac.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
So I'm very mindful of the energy levels in Chinese zodiac, the concept of personality colors, ways of working, ways of communication. And I use all of those actually when I interview to find out whether I feel somebody is going to be a good fit to work with me and within the team and in our company, because we are really small. So for example, I know that I'm a red tiger personality. I know that in that space, I can't be next to somebody who wants to have a conversation about the impact a decision is going to make on the environment, for example. In my brand, I know that that's absolutely essential and required, but I know that I can't be working right next to it. So I therefore know I need to put somebody in between me and that person in order to create a harmonious working space. And so, controversial as it is, I've spent the last decade really being mindful of who comes into our circle, because we all work so closely with one another. But I now feel like I've got a team at the moment where those personalities are so well aligned that every part of the process does what it needs to do. And we manage to hand off in that process from one to another, but that there is a great energy level that sits between us all.
And have you made any big mistakes in hiring in the past?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all have. The thing that I'm very thankful of is actually that the people who started with me 11 years ago in my floristry team are still with me today.
Oh, wow.
There's only 3 people, and those 3 people have moved to other parts of the globe that we don't operate in. But apart from that, the network that I now work with, which is over 200 strong, the original 3 still are with me today. And that's so lovely. But absolutely, of course, in that journey, any business owner gets to a space where you bring people into the fold and it's not quite the right dynamic or the right energy. I think the key is just being able to learn to identify that as quickly as you can and then just mitigate it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, everyone's going to make mistakes. No one's perfect.
Of course.
Especially in a small business where it's a few people, because, some people will say it's cliquey, but it's not necessarily cliquey. You have a sort of vision and a voice of a business, and you need those people to all pull in the same direction. Otherwise it fragments very quickly.
Absolutely. And it's a very, very different environment to work in if you go to work with somebody where you've got an owner-operated company versus something that's much larger and more established. You have a different structure. You have a different way of working. And it's not that either one of those are better or worse. They are just different. But perhaps your energy level doesn't necessarily connect with one of those. And so I think it's about, again, it goes back to matchmaking. It's about both people finding the right balance and accepting each other.
Yeah, makes total sense.
I mean, you've mentioned before that sustainability is such a big part of what you do as well. How do you work that in with the luxury side of things? Because a lot of the time, those two things don't go together. So how do you get those sustainability and sort of luxury events?
Events is a massive challenge because a lot of the work that we do is very much not sustainable. Absolutely. The work that we create is for a temporary moment in time. And then once that's done, it's not required anymore. So there's always the working challenge there. And I think in terms of the event side of our business, I'm always mindful of trying to implement techniques and ways of working that are more environmentally conscious. There are ways of creating work that are better than others, and I try to promote those as much as I humanly can. If I get the choice to do a design style that allows me to work in that way, I will choose it. Equally, if a client is very specific about what they want and there is only one way for me to create that, then commercially I'm going to work into that space, but I just try to mitigate that where I possibly can, and I try to guide wherever possible. On the flip side, when we were in lockdown and we couldn't do anything, I actually created a retail brand, which is called Bloom. And that was the first in the UK to be 100% plastic free and sustainable. And that was a little project very much of itself. We had time. We had nothing but time at the point because we couldn't do anything else. And I genuinely thought that I was going to get 2 new pages on a website, put some pretty pictures up and wrap it all in brown paper and ta-da, it'd be sustainable. 6 months later, and a really big rabbit hole, and I realized that wasn't quite the way it was. I had a huge education where I learnt so much about the different layers of greenwashing, the different layers of consideration that need to actually be consciously made in order to do this with a meaningful response. And that today still very much operates. It operates nationwide 7 days a week. And I'm very, very proud of that brand, because it's now a beautiful entity on its own. And it's very much challenging what is possible in that space. in order to reduce the amount of plastics that are going out there and just make some good conscious choices that really have a later impact.
So with your clients, are they all individuals, end users, or do you ever do work for like corporate entities?
Yeah, we do corporate projects as well.
And will they be a little bit more focused on trying to be sustainable because of their like sort of global mission statement?
Certainly, I think, yes, you're absolutely right. They definitely are. And I think a lot of it goes down to the consciousness of what can we do into a space. There has to be a bit of an accepted, if you're still going to have an event, for example, and you're still going to want to build stages, platforms, dance floor, all of those things, it's still going to happen. So how can you possibly do something else with that? How can you maybe reuse a product that you've worked on a previous project? How could you maybe refinish that? How can you do something that's not going to go straight into landfill afterwards? If it's with flowers, can they be regifted? Could they go to charity? Could they be remade into something? If we use plants, could we actually go and donate them to a charitable cause afterwards? There are certain ways that, especially if clients are open to also wanting to achieve that, there are ways that we can work together to then make sensible suggestions. And hand in hand, we can actually be making better choices.
And do you have any connections with any charities that you do sort of issue these flowers and plants to afterwards?
Yeah, we within our local communities, we actually, with what comes back off projects that aren't required for anything else, we donate to local hospices and retirement communities just so that those flowers are enjoyed further and going on. So actually what might come off of a wedding celebration will turn into bunches of flowers that then we deliver down to them just to provide ongoing joy. And that's always just a nice way of reusing.
It's a really good initiative.
Yeah,
I like that. So what's the hardest thing about, you mentioned you don't have loads of staff, but you're still across 4 offices. What's the hardest thing about operating globally, essentially?
The fact that my phone's never off. Time zones are definitely the trickiest. I generally work a 12 to 15 hour day in order to make sure that I support the team that are in New York, but equally say while I'm in London, that I'm here from 8 o'clock in the morning. And that I think is the biggest challenge it's literally time.
And how often are you in New York and how often are you in UK?
Roughly, I'd say about 50-50, but it depends on the time of year and it depends what projects are happening. So it's not an even split, but like the start or end of the year, that's more buoyant in the marketplace in New York. And over the summer months, Europe is busier. So I tend to just split myself depending on what's going on.
So all of that travel, has that ever led to burnout? How do you manage it?
I mean, I'm definitely the wrong person to be answering that question because I'm fairly sure I don't manage it well. I certainly don't think I take enough time for myself, but I do try to have a good routine when I travel. I try to make sure that I am mindful and from a self-care perspective that I do actually look after my body. I try to regulate as quickly as possible onto the time zone when I arrive so that then I can function. And within that, I think I try and just be mindful to take the time when I need it throughout the year. Like I just took this weekend and I needed 3 days to shut off, to then come back to be a functioning human being again. But I'll then work probably the next 14 straight before I then get another little break again. So I try to just take the gaps where I can, but I'm certainly open to learning about how to manage that better.
I think it's getting a balance because that business is your passion and that's what you want to do and it's what you want to, it's where you get probably a lot of your reward out of is working in satisfaction out, working in this business.
Totally.
So it almost becomes your hobby.
Well, exactly. The thing is that working for me is fun. I love what I do. I chose what I'm doing. So I don't look at it like I'm going to work. I'm not sitting behind a desk going, okay, how many hours until I can leave? I love what I'm doing, but I'll wake up tomorrow morning, for example, and be like, oh, I've got a really good idea for something. And then suddenly that's 3 emails later, an hour and a half spent doing something else and a phone call to a client going, you'll never guess what, I've just had the best idea. And so it's weird because it transfers into that space of kind of going personal work. It's all very murky. And I think what I've been learning more is I have to start taking some personal space where I kind of say, okay, phone down. phone away, not looking at emails, because otherwise Saturday afternoon and I'm like chatting about something else and it never ends. So your brain's never off. I'm not there yet.
You'll get
There's
there.
definitely more work to be done, but I am trying.
What do you do from a personal point of view when you are able to take some time off? What do you do personally that helps you kind of separate work and
The greatest thing that came out of lockdown is I bought a camera.
okay.
And at that time, I was really struggling mentally with the fact that my business was essentially going down the Swanee, was hemorrhaging money in that space, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I was still having to pay bills, but we weren't able to work. And being out of control is a very, very uncomfortable place for me to be, as I think anyone who runs their own business likes to be in control of what they're doing. So at that moment where we were locked down and I was at home, I bought a camera and I took myself out on that 30 minutes we were allowed out every day, and I took it with me and I would go and sit somewhere, and I suddenly brought myself back into control. Because it didn't actually matter whether I could take a good picture. If it was out of focus, it's because of user error. I did something wrong. And I was perfectly fine with the concept of failure. I just wasn't comfortable with the concept of failure by somebody else's actions. So then, by return, if I got something good out of that, I had succeeded. And now my form of escapism is to literally take a camera with me, go off for an afternoon, and I just go off on my own and I sit somewhere, and it could be street photography, it could be something in the top of a mountain, and it doesn't matter whether I'm any good at it. It's the fact that it takes me out of that space. I get to focus entirely on what I'm doing in that moment, and I get to forget about everything else.
Amazing.
And then if something nice comes out of it, I've got something to show for it.
Sure, there's something Harry can relate to.
Well, that's the thing, is it started like that. You know, with my business, it started because I had a passion for just taking photos.
Yeah.
And I wish I had that same mindset of it now, but unfortunately,
about what things look like.
Yeah.
So to me, this has been the kind of evolution of the whole journey. I cared about the visual. I just couldn't necessarily, at the time that I started realizing, before I had that aha moment, and even when I did, the question was, why do you care? And I was like, I don't know why I care about it. I care very much that over there, that table needs to go and be organized. I care very much that this looks weathered and worn. And suddenly I was like, okay, it all comes back to, I care very much about something being beautiful. Now I can then take that in 16 different directions and see joy in it. One of those earns me money. Another one of those earns me respite in my mental capacity. But I think harnessing that and just knowing that I'm in it for what is beautiful, and it's fun to me. Like, going to work is fun.
That's the ideal position to be in when you actually love what you do, right? So if you could look back, if you could go back to your younger self and give yourself some advice, what would you say?
Stay the course, definitely, and put the legwork in early. I was very mindful that before I turned 40, I wanted to make sure that I was in multiple territories globally. I'd set that as a goal for myself, that if it were to happen, if I were to go into that space, I still left myself the decision that it might not be. But if it were, I was like, you need to do it before this space. Not to say that I couldn't go and do that now, but I am aware that the older I'm becoming, the less risk averse I am, the more aware I am of what the impact might be or the amount of work to do, because I've done some of it already. And I think the wonderful thing about going into your own business at the beginning is you don't necessarily know what you don't know yet. You don't know what steps you're going to have to do. So you just deal with the hurdles as they come to you. When you're a little bit older, you already know that some of those are definitely coming towards you, and you ask yourself if you really want the headache. So I would definitely say push to do those things early, because then you can spend the time refining that over the next course and in that next chapter.
And did you have a mentor that helped you and guided you? Or anyone that you lent on and asked questions?
Not as one specific individual.
Okay.
But I think as much as it can sound silly to say people will come in and out of your life for a reason, I absolutely believe that that's true. And I believe that there's a lot of people that I've met over my journey and will continue to do so, that in that precise moment, for a particular reason, will come into your space, will assist you with what it is that you need, and then, for example, may then take a back seat.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Nice. Is there one kind of main point that you look back on in your career that's maybe one decision that completely changed where the business has ended up?
Yes. The first person I ever hired was an illustrator. And at the time that I did that, there really wasn't a design service being offered as such. And apologies to people if they were doing that and I just don't know who you are. But to the people that I'd encountered and the experiences I'd had, there really wasn't a service, especially in the UK, being offered at the level that there is now.
Yeah.
The whole industry has very much evolved now to provide a much fuller level of detail when working with these types of clients. When I began, people were doing the odd mood board, little Word document, spreadsheet with lots of numbers on. And in return for those rather big digits, you weren't getting a heck of a lot in return. And that was partly my frustration. But the thing that I sat there and said was, okay, well, how do I bridge the gap? How do I show you what it is that you're going to get? And then I thought, if you were using an interior designer to do your house up, for example, you would get samples and swatches and renderings and watercolors, all the kind of things. So you would know what this looks like before you hand any money over. So I was like, well, why shouldn't we be doing this? Even if it's just for a temporary moment in time, it's still the same amount of money.
Yeah.
So the first person I hired, who's still with me today, was an illustrator.
Okay.
And then we hand render every single one of those looks that goes out for our clients so that they understand exactly what it is that they're going to be getting.
So they really know what they're getting before.
Absolutely.
So you've done it 11 years now. What does the next 10 years look like? How's it going to adapt? What are there going to be any major changes, do you think, to the industry and to how you run your business?
I mean, I'm certainly not opening any more studios. 4 is enough to work with. My own hope is that we just continue to evolve and develop as a brand. We move with trends. We evolve creatively, and we continue to be in the privileged position that we are to work on those projects. And we just become ultimately better at what we're doing bit by bit.
Okay. And do you think the industry itself will be changing? Or do you think that niche is there to stay as it is?
I think it's forever refining. I think, you know, the expectation now, like we actually just said, I think the expectation now with clients, because somebody set a benchmark to say, actually, I'll create a render of what that's going to look like. Suddenly now that's a basic expectation. Everybody wants that now. So then you say, what's next? But clients are becoming ever demanding. Projects are becoming ever more complex and at all levels. So I think that there's constantly a state of refinement that we're working on to always go, okay, how can we bring that to you even more? How can we provide you with even more clarity than we were in the first place? And I think that goes hand in hand with the advances that we have in technology, the things like AI coming into this space. It's a very, very useful tool for us. But ultimately, if people know that this is there, and if clients are in a position where they can suddenly log on to something and start dictating into Midjourney what they want something to look like and create a better rendering than I can create, we've got an issue. So I think we're constantly having to go into a space where we're pushing the boundaries of what's considered excellence. And then how can we refine that process even more? How can we make that experience more luxurious? How can we make it more enjoyable?
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And it's just continuously raising the bar and matching it and raising it again, right?
Totally. It'd be really nice if we didn't have to. Sometimes it's very exhausting. But no, and I think also, jokes aside, that's actually what makes it exciting, because you're constantly having to reinvent yourself. You're constantly having to find a way to push yourself, and not necessarily against somebody else. But you're like, how do you better what you did before? How do you do a better wedding delivery than you did before? How do you do a better presentation? And I think it's constantly more about, going slightly off topic, but I think that's very much also where you start to kind of go, where is that mindset going of what you're creating? And actually, I think worrying about what it is that you're doing and how to improve that versus looking at what somebody else is offering, so important.
Yeah, much more important to just focus on what you're doing.
If you're constantly challenging yourself against yourself, you're constantly going to be evolving and improving.
Amazing. I mean, just to kind of finish up, I think it'd be quite nice to almost hear a little bit about specific clients and projects that you've done that that might stand out. Anything. What was kind of maybe start with what was sort of the first international thing that you did that maybe you realised, this isn't just a London-based thing; it can be international as well.
The first one that I had ever done was actually in Saudi Arabia in the middle of lockdown, and I was asked to go and build a private members club in the middle of a desert with 2 weeks' notice. And I had nothing else to do in that time, so I was absolutely thrilled to accept this challenge. And I sat there, and by the end of 2 weeks, I think they found me under my desk, because I was dealing with import-export. It was no longer about design anymore. It was literally about logistics, freighting things on an aircraft, and permits, all things that I really wasn't qualified or equipped for. But I very much enjoyed the challenge that comes from a destination project. So I enjoyed the variables that then needed to be overcome in that space beyond just product delivery. I became very good at product delivery, still am very good at product delivery. But that in itself was almost then not enough anymore. Yeah. How can I make it more challenging? How can I make it more difficult for myself? Because apparently that's what's going to create the most amount of validation for me personally. And I definitely found that going into spaces that don't necessarily have an infrastructure, or they haven't created events before, or they really aren't fit to have events. There's no electricity, there's no water, there's no anything. That's fun for me.
The real challenge.
Exactly. Some days I'm like, really? Why? Why do you need to be challenged this way? I do ask myself that often. I speak with my therapist about it. However, I do find it really exciting going into those locations. So actually that's ultimately been where our brand has naturally grown and developed into a very international business and a very destination-based brand, where we do have local presences in 4 different regions, but equally I'm very happy to travel and go anywhere. And we have the ability to mobilize in that way very quickly, because our whole team is very adept at how to function in those kind of environments. And actually, that really has nothing to do with design anymore. That's the other side of it, the operational logistics side about delivery, that is the challenge, and that is the very, very necessary silent partner that has to go hand in hand with the work that we do that everybody sees.
Is that challenge your favorite thing about what you do, or?
That constant challenge is definitely, I think, what keeps it fresh and interesting for me. So when we first went to Italy, I remember the romanticism of working in Italy. I was like, oh, this is beautiful. Palazzos on a lake. I love it. And then you realize that these palazzos were not built for an event. They're not actually really big enough to house 150 people. So everybody's outside. They're usually on the side of a cliff with a lot of steps. And in that moment, you just realize that you're like, this environment is not conducive to pulling a truck up, to wheeling things in. And it has its own beast. And I think I hated every second of the first job that we ever did there, because I was like absolutely exhausted. Then I looked at the view and it all kind of made it okay. And I loved the culture and I loved the people. And then suddenly everything started kind of softening. And you kind of, oh, I could do that again. Oh, okay. And then you just, again, you learn. There are certain things that you learn there that you absolutely need to do. Like hire a boat with a crane. Don't try and walk everything down steps. That you just wouldn't know until you go into that space. But it is that constant challenge and that constant change of variables that means that I feel that need to try and excel, overcome something, succeed at it, and then I get to go into another space and do that again, because no one venue or no one location is the same.
And is there a location for you that is your favorite place, whether it's country, city?
Italy has the softest spot in my heart, I'll be honest. It's like everything about that country, apart from the bureaucracy, but everything apart from that, I absolutely adore. And so I'm really enjoying now spending that time going through all different parts of the country.
Yeah, it's stunning, isn't it?
So beautiful.
Lake Como particularly.
Exactly. But you go
beautiful.
from north to south, they're so different in terms of different looks, feels and environment that actually they all pose their own challenges. They've all got different variables, which is so, so lovely. And then equally, I love somebody asking me to go to a country I've never visited before. So somebody that wants me to do something in the jungle, I'm just throwing it out there, or a floating platform on the sea, just let me know.
There's that floating beach club in Thailand.
See, I could be open to this.
That would be a challenge. Probably rocks.
Okay, maybe I would need to improve my sea legs before I do that one. But that's the kind of thing that I'm open to.
Okay, cool.
We've obviously got, me and Will probably be looking to get married in the next, what do you reckon, 5-6 years, something like that, probably less, but well, for you especially. But what have you got any advice or things we should look out for when planning an event and looking at bringing somebody in to do the floral design and things like that?
I think very much go with a relationship-based approach to all of the vendors that you work with. The space that we're in, as you well know, is very, very subjective. Creativity is subjective, and everything that we do is about relationships. So go with the people that you have a particular energy towards, and then allow them to do what they do best. Give them the space to go away and be creative. Don't try and micromanage that process. Don't try and overanalyze what's there. Put the right people into the right seats and then let them do what they do, because the outcome will be so spectacular.
Amazing. I feel like you can take that advice for our businesses as well. It's a good all-round piece.
It's a simple principle that if we could actually do it, I think it would do everybody wonders. But at the same time, it's just very interesting. We're so used to managing very closely what we do and being very, very detail orientated that actually you just need to equip the right people. You've hired them for a reason. Go away. If there's something really specific you want, a bit like if somebody said to you, hey, there's a really particular capture I want you to get, fine. Absolutely not a problem. I'm not saying go with a blank check and a blank piece of paper and go do whatever you want to do. Know what it is that you would like, articulate the things that are important to you. But at that space, you've handed that information over. Allow us to now do our bit. We'll take that, we'll respect that, but I'm going to come back to the table with something you haven't even thought of yet, and so are you. And in doing so, you're going to get the best output possible.
And are you able to disclose the largest sum of money you've received for an event? The largest project you've done? Don't need to give away the name of the person.
I mean, it's in tens of millions.
Wow.
On design, yeah.
On design and installation, or purely design?
Just in terms of my contribution to the project.
Incredible. That is.
I can't imagine spending that on just on a wedding alone, just one aspect of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's crazy. But then equally, everything is tailored according to somebody's availability to do so.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. Well, look, thank you very much, Larry, for coming on.
Pleasure.
It's been pleasure. It's been really interesting talking to you. Learned a lot. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.